Administrative and legislative reforms after 1857. Government of India Act 1858. British Crown decided to assume sovereignty over India from the East India Company in an apparent consequence of the revolt of 1857, described as an armed sepoy mutiny by the British historian and remembered as the first war of independence by the Indian. The first statute for the Government of India under the direct rule of the British government was the Government of India Act 1858. It provided for absolute imperial control over India without any popular participation in the administration of the country. The power of the Crown were to be exercised by the Secretary of State for India, assisted by a council of 15 members known as the Council of India. The country was divided into provinces headed by a governor or lieutenant governor aided by the Executive Council. The provincial government had to function under the superintendent's direction and control of the Governor General in all matters. All the authority for the governance of India was vested in the Governor General in Council, who was responsible to the Secretary of India. The Secretary of State was ultimately responsible to the British Parliament. Indian Council Act 1861. This is an important landmark in the constitutional history of India. By this act, the power of the Crown were to be exercised by the Secretary of State for India, assisted by a council of 15 members known as the Council of India. The Secretary of State who was responsible to be the British Parliament governed India through the Governor General assisted by an Executive Council. This act enabled the Governor-General to associate representatives of the Indian people with the work of legislation by nominating them to his expanded council. This act provided that the Governor-General's Executive Council should include certain additional non-official members also while transacting legislative business as a legislative council, but this legislative council was neither representative nor deliberative in any sense. It decentralized the legislative powers of the Governor-General's Council and vested them in the governments of Bombay and Madras. Indian Council Act 1892. The non-official members of the Indian Legislative Council were to be nominated by the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Provincial Legislative Council, while the non-official members of the Provincial Council were to be nominated by certain local bodies such as universities, district boards, municipalities, and zamindars etc. The council were to have the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Morley Minto reforms and the Indian Council Act 1909. Reform recommended uh, by the then Secretary of India for India and the Viceroy were implemented by the Indian Council Act 1909. The maximum number of additional members of the Indian Legislative Council was raised from 16 to 60. The size of provincial legislative councils was enlarged by including elected non-official members so that the official majority was gone. And an element of election was also introduced in legislative council at the center also, but here the official majority there was maintained. The Legislative Council were empowered to move resolutions on the budget and on any matter of public interest, except certain specified subjects such as the armed force, foreign affairs, and the Indian state. It provided for the first time for separate representation of the Muslim community and thus sought the seeds of separatism. The Government of India Act 1915. This act was passed to consolidate the provision of preceding Government of India Act.